You have been told that weed is for chilling out, for giggles and munchies, for turning your brain off. That every time you lit up, you escaped reality for a hazy, lazy buzz. But what if I told you that you were wrong the whole time? What if I told you that every puff, every toke, every inhale was not nightly dissipation, but a potential doorway into a deeper, richer world? That every time you lit up, you were not escaping reality. You were entering it, stepping into something more profound. You were not getting high. You were getting hijacked. Hijacked not by the plant, but by your own misunderstanding of it. This sacred plant was never meant to numb pain or wipe stress away. It was given to dissolve illusion, to unravel the veil that obscures your perception. The buzz you've been calling getting high is only an echo of something far more ancient: activation. It has been used by mystics, prophets, saints, and adepts across cultures and epochs as a tool for awakening, not escape. But somewhere along the way, its meaning was stolen, repackaged, reduced, and trivialized. What you see now in memes, in dispensaries, in rolling papers, and giggling TikTok stoner jokes is the degradation of something sacred, a spiritual activation turned into pop culture fluff. Cannabis was given to us to lift the veil, not to cloud the mind. It was never meant to make you slow, forgetful, lazy. But that's exactly how we've come to see it. As weed culture, chill sessions, brownies on a couch. We embraced the superficial over the sacred. Centuries of repression and prohibition pushed out ritual and ancient reverence. Western medicine dismissed it, and modern culture built a caricature. The lazy stoner, the impulsive recreational user, the person too much in search of dopamine to ever seek depth. You may imagine that cannabis is just some chemical that alters perception, but that is surface thinking. If instead you began with reverence, intention, respect, you would find that it reveals, not changes you. It uncovers what is inside already. It reflects your confusion if you use it mindlessly, and reveals your clarity if you use it consciously. This is the difference between being high and being hijacked. Think about the Sanskrit word vijaya. Before it was called weed, before it was turned into memes, laws, dispensaries, rolling papers, it was known by this name. Vijaya meant the conqueror of suffering. That is not stoner talk, that is sacred language. That is the real meaning that was stripped away over centuries of criminalization and misinformation. The ancients didn't stumble onto cannabis, they revered it. In India, sadhus consumed it to still the mind before entering deep samadhi. It was not about getting silly or giggly, it was about opening consciousness, piercing illusion, sitting in silence beyond identity. In ancient Egypt, priests burned it in sacred rituals seeking communion with Thoth, the god of wisdom. It was not a drug for recreation, it was a divine conductor, a medium through which higher insight could flow. It is even believed that cannabis, translated loosely as fragrant cane in some biblical texts, was actually cannabis used in anointing oils during sacred rites. These are not fringe speculations, they are interpretations anchored in history, in sacred languages, in ancient traditions. So what happened? How did we lose this? How did we go from sacred smoke to TikTok stoner jokes, from rituals to vape pens, from ceremonies to dispensaries? Somewhere along the way, the sacred was stripped, and the superficial was sold in its place. Colonial empires criminalized it. Modern medicine dismissed it. Culture rebranded it as a lazy escape. The plant that was once a key to consciousness became an off switch. But behind that noise, behind decades of stigma, the real story remained buried. Now modern science is finally catching up. Researchers at UCLA discovered that cannabis increases blood flow to the frontal cortex, the very area associated with self-reflection, metacognition, spirituality. Johns Hopkins scientists have linked THC to altered states that mirror deep meditation. Brain scans show elevated alpha and gamma wave activity during cannabis use, the exact same frequencies observed in Tibetan monks during deep states of bliss and clarity. These are not guesses, they are measurable phenomena. It means everything that the mystics claimed thousands of years ago was not myth. It was real. But here is what most people miss. Intention changes everything. When you approach this plant with reverence, respect, purpose, it opens a different door. It does not pull you out of your life. It pulls you deeper into it. When you treat it casually, habitually, mindlessly, it becomes a fog, not a flame. It does not expand your mind, it wraps it in cotton, turning insight into numbness. You confuse stimulation with illumination, forgetting that the same key that unlocks sacred insight can also trap you in a loop if you forget what it's really for. That's the crux. Most of us are stuck numbing out instead of waking up. We're stuck believing the superficial stories. We've been trained to think cannabis is entertainment, not activation. But it was never meant to be entertainment. It was given as a tool for awakening, for revelation, for dissolving illusion. It is a catalyst, a key, not a drug. The same plant that could lead you to spiritual insight has been cheapened to a commodity, a gimmick. You might feel when you light up that it is showing you something, some glimpse, some truth, some version of yourself that is more awake, more aware. That sensation is not illusion. You are tapping into something ancient, something designed. But like any spiritual tool, it demands respect. It demands intention. It demands awareness. Without that, it can become not activation, but entrapment. Hijacked consciousness, stuck in a loop of distraction, dissociation, dopamine chasing, and that's why some knowledge is too sensitive for YouTube. That's why in our Insights Academy newsletter, we go deeper into rituals, forgotten texts, sacred techniques that they won't let us say out loud here. If you sign up, you'll also receive a free ebook copy of the Kabbalion, but only for a limited time. Because the truth is, once you see this, you cannot go back. Once the veil is lifted, you begin to perceive what has always been there. Cannabis does not change you. It reveals you. It lifts the veil. But what you see when the veil lifts depends completely on the space you are in. Your mental, emotional, and spiritual alignment. Most people are not in a sacred space. They are in survival mode, overstimulated, disconnected, desperate for a moment of peace. So when they light up, they sink into distraction, not awakening. The plant does not fail them. They fail to approach it with purpose. In doing so, they strip it of its ancient power. So reclaim the path. Let today be the moment you turn away from superficial distractions and return to intention, ritual, and respect. Reclaim the use of this sacred plant for what it was meant to be. A key to higher consciousness, a way to face reality, not escape it. Raw, unfiltered, divine. The difference between being high and being hijacked is your intention. The way you're using weed wrong is the fact that you don't use it consciously. Your suffering might not be caused by the plant. Instead, it might be kept alive by how you've forgotten its purpose. Reconnect with that forgotten lineage of wisdom. Step into sacred activation, and remember what you think you become. Throughout history, wisdom has been passed down not only through words and writings, but through living traditions, rituals, and sacred tools. Among these, cannabis was not simply a recreational plant, it was a bridge between the ordinary and the divine, between the human and the eternal. When we look into the ancient world, we find hints of a spiritual technology that has been buried, forgotten, and even intentionally suppressed. At the center of this lost knowledge stands one figure, Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, writing, and esoteric knowledge. To understand why we are using weed wrong today, we must journey back to those ancient origins, to the roots of spiritual activation that began millennia ago and still whisper to us beneath the haze of modern misconceptions. Imagine walking into an Egyptian temple thousands of years ago. The air is heavy with incense. Priests move in deliberate rhythms, chanting invocations that have been recited unchanged for generations. At the heart of this ritual is not escape, not entertainment, but connection, an intentional process of aligning one's mind with higher wisdom. Cannabis in that sacred space was not rolled into a joint for idle pleasure. It was prepared, sanctified, and used as a conduit. The smoke was not inhaled to get high, but to open channels of perception that everyday thinking could not access. It was a method of activation, a way to sharpen spiritual senses to commune with the unseen. Thoth, known as Jehuti in the Egyptian tongue, was more than a mythological figure. He represented a principle, an archetype of divine wisdom. Credited with inventing writing, measurement, and magical arts, Thoth embodied the integration of knowledge and spiritual power. Hieroglyphs depict him as a man with the head of an ibis holding a scribe's palette, or sometimes as a baboon. These symbols point to his role as mediator between gods and humans, the keeper of secrets that elevate consciousness. In esoteric traditions, Thoth is also connected with Hermes Trismegistus, the supposed author of the Hermetic teachings that describe reality as a mental, divine construct. When ancient Egyptian priests used cannabis in their sacred rites, it was not separate from the wisdom of Thoth, it was part of it. The plant acted as a divine conductor, enhancing awareness and connecting initiates to cosmic truths that could not be grasped by ordinary thought. To understand this, consider how other ancient cultures treated the plant. In India, cannabis was referred to as Vijaya, meaning victory or conqueror of suffering. It was offered to Shiva, the great yogi, and consumed before entering deep meditation or spiritual ecstasy. This was not a party favor, it was a sacrament. In biblical times, there are strong arguments that the holy anointing oils used by priests contained cannabis, identified as cannabis, and that these oils were essential for rituals of purification and divine communion. Among Sufi mystics, indigenous shamans, and Taoist alchemists, cannabis and similar entheogens were integral to practices of transcendence. The pattern is undeniable. Throughout history, across continents, sacred traditions recognized this plant as a means of accessing higher realms of consciousness. But with time, much of this wisdom was lost or deliberately erased. Empires rose and sought to consolidate power not just over land, but over minds and souls. Colonial authorities banned and demonized traditional plant medicines to sever people from their native spiritual practices. Knowledge that once empowered individuals to experience direct divine insight was suppressed because it was dangerous to ruling powers. A person who awakens spiritually cannot be easily manipulated. They cannot be controlled by fear or deception. And so the plant that could unlock inner freedom was labeled as a vice, criminalized, and relegated to the shadows. Modern culture compounded this loss. As cannabis re-emerged in the West, it was stripped of its sacred context and rebranded as a recreational substance. Its image was reduced to the trope of lazy stoners or youthful rebellion. Scientific materialism further dismissed spiritual interpretations as superstition, treating altered states of consciousness as little more than neurological quirks. What was once a sacred technology became just another consumer product. We forgot what ancient adepts knew, that cannabis is not inherently enlightening or stupefying. It depends entirely on how it is used, the intention behind it, and the ritual framework surrounding it. The wisdom of Thoth, the practices of ancient priests and mystics faded into obscurity, replaced by convenience, commodification, and casual misuse. To reclaim this lost spiritual activation, we must understand what it truly entailed. Ancient rituals were not simple acts of smoking or ingestion. They were elaborate, intentional processes designed to guide consciousness safely and purposefully into altered states. Priests underwent years of training to handle these sacred substances responsibly. They combined cannabis with chanting, rhythmic drumming, fasting, and breathwork. Every action had meaning. The timing of rituals aligned with celestial events. The geometry of temples amplified specific energies. The hieroglyphic inscriptions encoded cosmic principles. When a priest inhaled sacred smoke, they were not getting high. They were activating latent faculties of perception, aligning with universal wisdom, and transmitting insights to guide their communities. Modern neuroscience gives us a glimpse of why these rituals worked. We know that THC, the primary psychoactive compound in cannabis, interacts with the endocannabinoid system, modulating neural pathways involved in memory, emotion, and perception. This can disrupt habitual patterns of thought and open access to non-ordinary states of consciousness. Ancient priests didn't need brain scans to know this. They experienced it directly and developed techniques to channel it constructively. Without such techniques, the same neurochemical effects can lead to confusion, paranoia, or escapism. In other words, cannabis can either activate wisdom or amplify delusion. It all depends on the context and the mind using it. Thoth's lost spiritual activation is not just an Egyptian story. It is a universal pattern of sacred knowledge buried under centuries of misunderstanding. Across cultures, initiates used entheogens not to dull the senses but to awaken dormant capacities. They approached these plants as allies, as teachers. Modern users often miss this entirely. They treat cannabis like alcohol or fast food, consuming it habitually, impulsively, without reverence or purpose. This is why so many report foggy thinking, lethargy, or dependence. They are using a sacred key as a mere escape hatch. Without intention, the doorway to wisdom remains locked. Reconnecting with the wisdom of Thoth requires more than knowing historical facts. It demands a transformation in how we approach the plant today. Imagine if every session of cannabis use began not with idle conversation or digital distraction, but with a moment of silence. Imagine setting a clear intention to understand yourself, to face hidden truths, to connect with the divine spark within. Imagine preparing a sacred space free from noise and interruption, where you can fully honor the experience. This is not romantic fantasy. It is how spiritual practitioners have worked with entheogens for millennia. By restoring these principles, we begin to shift from hijacked consciousness to authentic activation. The teachings of Thoth, preserved in Hermetic texts, speak of principles like mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. These are not abstract metaphysical ideas. They are practical tools for mastering reality. Altered states induced by sacred substances were used to experience these principles directly, to feel them as undeniable truths rather than intellectual theories. When consciousness expands, one can perceive the interconnectedness of all things, the vibration of energy beneath matter, the polarity within unity. Ancient initiates did not just read about wisdom, they embodied it. Cannabis was part of this journey, a catalyst that allowed them to cross thresholds of perception normally inaccessible. Why is this important now? Because our modern world is drowning in information but starving for wisdom. We have more access to cannabis than at any point in recent history, yet we are further from understanding its sacred potential. Recreational use dominates, and while legalization has brought freedom from persecution, it has also encouraged commercialization that disconnects the plant from its roots. Dispensaries sell strains with names that trivialize their power. Marketing focuses on relaxation or euphoria, not spiritual insight. This is not inherently bad, but it is incomplete. It keeps users locked in the lowest levels of experience, never reaching the activation that Thoth and other sages spoke of. To awaken this lost potential, we must not only change our personal habits, but collectively revive forgotten practices. We need modern equivalents of sacred temples, spaces where cannabis can be explored with guidance, ritual, and intention. We need teachers who understand both the spiritual heritage and the psychological science of altered states. We need communities that support mindful, purposeful use rather than reckless indulgence. This is not about rejecting modern pleasures or returning to some imagined past. It is about integrating ancient wisdom with contemporary knowledge to reclaim what was stolen. The power of spiritual activation. When you light up without intention, you close the door on this legacy. You hijack yourself, cycling through temporary highs and lows without transformation. But when you approach cannabis as the ancients did, as Thoth's priests did, you step into a lineage of awakening. You align yourself with practices that dissolved illusions, healed suffering, and revealed divine truths. You begin to see cannabis not as a crutch or vice, but as a sacred ally on the path to self-realization. This is the shift that turns misuse into mastery, distraction into discovery, numbness into gnosis. The second chapter of this journey is about remembering who you are and what you hold in your hands when you hold this plant. It is about seeing beyond centuries of distortion to rediscover a wisdom that belongs to you. The rituals of Thoth may never be fully reconstructed, but their essence is indestructible. It lives in the potential of every mindful breath of sacred smoke, in every moment you choose awareness over habit. When you choose to use cannabis not to flee reality but to face it, you reconnect with a stream of consciousness that flows back to the temples of ancient Egypt, to the chanting priests, to the ibis-headed god of wisdom himself. You reconnect with the lost spiritual activation that modern culture has forgotten. Reclaiming this knowledge is not just personal, it is revolutionary. A society that remembers how to activate consciousness cannot be easily manipulated. A person who awakens spiritually sees through the illusions of fear, greed, and division that dominate the modern world. This is why spiritual tools have always been suppressed. They free the mind. By restoring intention, ritual, and reverence to cannabis use, we take back a fragment of that freedom. We honor Thoth, the timeless guide of wisdom, and we begin to heal the disconnect that has plagued humanity for centuries. This is why you are using weed wrong. It is not because the plant is flawed, but because its true purpose has been lost. To find it again, you must become a seeker, an initiate, a modern priest of consciousness. You must remember the teachings buried in stone temples and hermetic manuscripts, and most importantly, you must remember that the power to awaken has always been within you, waiting for the right key. Cannabis can be that key, but only if you choose to use it not for escape, but for activation. Modern science often prides itself on uncovering truths that mystics supposedly imagined. Yet time and again, the latest research stumbles into ancient insights long held by sages, shamans, and seers. The story of cannabis is no exception. Thousands of years ago, mystics described the plant as a tool for dissolving illusion, for accessing divine states of consciousness, for opening pathways to wisdom inaccessible through normal thought. They had no fMRI machines, no EEG headsets, no peer-reviewed journals. They relied on direct experience, refined through ritual and reverence. Today, after decades of suppression, neuroscience, psychology, and medicine are beginning to validate what the ancients already knew. Cannabis is not just a recreational intoxicant. It is a portal to expanded consciousness. But as with all powerful tools, the outcome depends on intention, context, and wisdom. To understand why this matters, imagine the brain as a vast network of highways and hidden paths. Most of us live in a mental traffic jam. Repetitive thoughts, conditioned responses, survival patterns that dominate our waking hours. Cannabis interacts with the endocannabinoid system, a regulatory network that influences mood, memory, pain perception, and neural plasticity. THC, CBD, and other cannabinoids fit into receptors like keys in locks, modulating signals across the nervous system. This can temporarily disrupt habitual thinking, allowing new connections to form. It can also enhance sensory perception, slow time perception, and alter the sense of self. Ancient mystics would describe this not as a chemical reaction, but as a shift in vibration, a thinning of the veil between ordinary reality and deeper truths. Modern science provides the biological explanation, but the subjective experience remains the same. Reality feels different, and in that difference, wisdom can emerge. Consider the research from UCLA showing increased blood flow to the prefrontal cortex under the influence of cannabis. This region is critical for executive functions, planning, self-reflection, moral reasoning. Enhanced activity here aligns with reports of heightened introspection during cannabis use. Similarly, studies at Johns Hopkins and other institutions show that THC can induce altered states resembling those achieved in deep meditation or even low doses of classic psychedelics. Brainwave measurements reveal elevated alpha and gamma activity, frequencies associated with relaxed yet alert awareness and states of peak cognitive integration. Tibetan monks in profound meditative absorption exhibit similar neural patterns. When cannabis is used with the right mindset, the brain appears to enter a rhythm akin to spiritual practice, bridging ancient ritual with modern neurology. Yet for every story of insight and transformation, there are countless accounts of lethargy, anxiety, or cognitive dulling. The same substance can liberate or limit. This paradox baffled early researchers but makes perfect sense in light of spiritual teachings. Cannabis is not an automatic enlightenment button. It amplifies the state you bring into it. Use it unconsciously and it can magnify confusion. Use it with reverence and focus and it can magnify clarity. Brain imaging confirms this. Users who enter a session with mindful preparation show distinct neural patterns compared to those who consume impulsively or compulsively. In other words, the plant does not dictate your experience, you do. The key is consciousness. Ancient initiates understood this intimately. Ritual provided a structure that modern usage lacks. Before consuming, they purified the body with fasting or cleansing baths. They aligned intention through prayer or mantra. They entered sacred spaces designed to evoke awe and silence the ordinary mind. These conditions primed neural circuits for profound experience. Modern science has a parallel concept: set and setting. Research on psychedelics shows that mindset and environment largely determine therapeutic or spiritual outcomes. Cannabis, though milder, operates on the same principle. Without proper set and setting, its potential remains dormant or misdirected. This is where modern society falters. We light up in chaotic environments, scroll endlessly on devices, snack mindlessly, and call it relaxation. We smoke to forget, not to remember. Neuroscience explains why this becomes habitual. Cannabis can hijack dopamine pathways, creating cycles of temporary pleasure followed by craving. Over time, this reduces baseline motivation and cognitive sharpness. What was meant to awaken becomes a narcotic lullaby. It is not the plant's fault, it is our ignorance of its design. We are like untrained pilots trying to fly a sophisticated craft without reading the manual. The result is turbulence, not transcendence. But just as misuse has measurable downsides, conscious use shows measurable benefits. Controlled studies demonstrate that mindful cannabis sessions can enhance pattern recognition, promote divergent thinking, a hallmark of creativity, and facilitate emotional processing. Patients in therapeutic settings report breakthroughs in trauma integration and self-compassion. Artists describe entering flow states where inspiration feels guided by something greater than themselves. These accounts mirror descriptions from ancient spiritual texts, moments of unity, insight, and connection to a divine source. When modern MRI scanners show synchronized brain activity across distant neural networks during such sessions, it is as if science is rediscovering what Thoth's disciples already practiced: cannabis as a catalyst for inner alchemy. One striking example comes from research on memory reconsolidation. Typically, traumatic memories are stored rigidly, replaying distress long after the event has passed. Cannabinoids can soften these neural traces, allowing them to be reprocessed in safer emotional contexts. This is not erasure, it is transformation. Ancient healers spoke of ceremonies where sacred smoke lifted emotional burdens, allowing initiates to face hidden pain and release it into divine light. Today, therapists use cannabis-assisted sessions to achieve similar outcomes. The language differs, but the essence is unchanged. Cannabis can conquer suffering, as its Sanskrit name Vijaya implies, when used to illuminate and integrate shadowed parts of the psyche. Another scientific revelation involves neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. Chronic stress and rigid habits narrow neural pathways, making change difficult. Cannabinoids can temporarily increase plasticity, offering a window where new perspectives and behaviors can take root. Meditation and spiritual contemplation do the same, fostering flexibility in thought and perception. Combine the two with intention, and transformation accelerates. Ancient adepts may not have known the term neuroplasticity, but they mastered its practical use. Through ritual, breathwork, chanting, and entheogens, they restructured consciousness, lifting it toward divine understanding. Modern neuroscience is only beginning to map what they experience directly. Skeptics argue that any insights under cannabis are illusory, products of intoxicated imagination. But research challenges this dismissal. Studies comparing cannabis-induced insights with sober problem-solving find that many revelations hold true validity when revisited later. Participants often describe shifts in life perspective that persist long after the session ends. Spiritual practitioners call this gnosis, a knowing beyond rational analysis. Neuroscience frames it as integration. Experiences are encoded into long-term neural patterns, altering behavior and worldview. Whether you call it mystical awakening or cognitive reframing, the result is real, measurable, and transformative. The tragedy is that without proper guidance, most users never reach this potential. They hover in shallow waters, unaware of the ocean beneath. Legalization, while liberating, has not solved this problem. If anything, it has amplified commercialization that celebrates excess while neglecting wisdom. Strains are bred for potency without considering spiritual balance. Edibles and oils promise convenience, but lack ritual context. Even medical cannabis, invaluable for pain and illness, rarely incorporates intentional frameworks for awakening. Science measures the effects but rarely asks the deeper question: to what end? Ancient traditions knew the end: self-realization, communion with divine wisdom, liberation from illusion. Until we reclaim that purpose, we remain hijacked, even in legality. There are glimmers of hope. Mindfulness-based cannabis practices are emerging, blending modern psychology with ancient ritual. Meditation circles integrate cannabis to deepen presence and insight. Retreats offer guided ceremonies resembling indigenous traditions. Researchers study therapeutic protocols that mirror shamanic journeys. These movements hint at a renaissance where science and spirituality converge, where Thoth's lost activation awakens anew. Imagine clinics that are also temples, where neural imaging guides initiates through sacred experiences, combining millennia of mystical knowledge with 21st century precision. Imagine using technology not to distract, but to calibrate consciousness for divine encounter. This is not fantasy. It is a natural evolution if we honor both ancient wisdom and modern understanding. As we peel back layers of stigma and rediscover cannabis' sacred role, we must remember that science alone cannot restore its power. Data can map the territory but cannot walk the path. Brain scans can show altered states but cannot reveal their meaning. That meaning comes from intention, reverence, and practice. The ancients did not separate knowledge from wisdom. Thoth embodied both. To use cannabis rightly today, we must do the same. We must let neuroscience inform ritual and let ritual give science its soul. Only then does cannabis shift from a drug of distraction to a key of awakening. This is why understanding the science matters. It validates what mystics already knew, bridging past and present. It also empowers us to refine and reclaim sacred practices without superstition. Knowledge of neural mechanisms can help design safer, more effective spiritual experiences. Awareness of psychological risks can prevent misuse. But ultimately, the lesson remains unchanged. Cannabis reveals what you bring to it. If you bring fear, confusion, or avoidance, it magnifies these. If you bring curiosity, courage, and devotion to truth, it magnifies wisdom. The choice has always been ours. The third chapter of this journey is about embracing this synthesis. We live in an age where the wisdom of Thoth can be rediscovered not just through dusty scrolls, but through microscopes and mind scans. The challenge is not access, it is remembrance. We must remember why the ancients revered this plant, why they wove it into temples and rites of passage. We must remember that spiritual activation is not a relic of history, but a living possibility in every mindful breath of sacred smoke. And we must remember that science and spirituality are not enemies, but allies in lifting the veil of illusion. When we honor this alliance, we step closer to what Thoth offered humanity. A path to divine wisdom hidden in plain sight, awaiting only our conscious activation. All journeys must eventually lead to practice. Knowledge without application is like a map you never use, impressive to look at, but ultimately useless for reaching your destination. We have uncovered the illusions of modern cannabis culture, retraced its sacred roots, and connected ancient wisdom with modern science. Now it is time to bridge all these insights into a living, breathing practice. This is the final step of Thoth's lost spiritual activation, learning how to use the plant with intention, reverence, and precision, turning every session into an opportunity for awakening rather than an escape into fog. Imagine standing at the threshold of an ancient temple. The massive stone doors carved with hieroglyphs depicting gods, cosmic cycles, and the mysteries of existence. You are not just visiting a ruin. You are stepping into a dimension where consciousness is molded, refined, and elevated. The priests who once stood here understood the power of altered states. They prepared themselves not just physically but spiritually for encounters with divine wisdom. When they consumed sacred substances, including cannabis, it was part of a carefully orchestrated ritual designed to activate hidden capacities of the mind and soul. If we want to reclaim this lost activation, we must reintroduce ritual, not as empty ceremony, but as practical technology for consciousness. The first element of this practice is intention. Intention is not merely thinking, "I want to get spiritual." It is a deliberate alignment of your mental, emotional, and energetic state toward a higher purpose. Before you even touch the plant, ask yourself, what truth do I seek? What suffering do I wish to overcome? What insight or connection am I ready to receive? Write it down. Speak it aloud. Ancient priests chanted or prayed to frame their consciousness for the experience. Modern science would describe this as priming neural networks, setting cognitive filters that guide perception. Without intention, cannabis is like a lamp with no direction. It illuminates nothing in particular and easily devolves into distraction. With intention, it becomes a focused beam, revealing hidden patterns and truths within yourself and the universe. The second element is preparation of space. The environment in which you engage with cannabis profoundly shapes the experience. Ancient temples were designed with sacred geometry, acoustics that amplified chants, and symbols that anchored higher meanings. You may not have a temple, but you can create a sacred space. Clean your surroundings. Remove noise and interruptions. Light a candle or incense to signal the shift from mundane to sacred time. Place objects that hold spiritual significance for you. Books of wisdom, stones, images of deities, or natural beauty. These cues prime your senses, signaling your subconscious that you are entering a different state of being. Modern psychology confirms this. Environmental cues strongly influence mindset, emotion, and neurochemistry. By crafting a space with care, you replicate the ancient practice of stepping into a temple where higher consciousness becomes accessible. The third element is physical preparation. Ancient initiates fasted or ate light, plant-based meals before sacred ceremonies to clear the body's channels. Breathwork was used to center the mind and oxygenate the brain. Simple stretches or yoga postures loosen tension, allowing energy to flow. Today, you can adopt similar practices. Fast for a few hours or avoid heavy, greasy foods beforehand. Practice slow, deep breathing to calm the nervous system and activate parasympathetic states conducive to introspection. These acts are not superstition. They modulate the body's biochemistry, reduce anxiety, and prepare neural circuits for heightened perception. Science now documents how breathwork influences brain waves and emotional regulation, echoing techniques perfected thousands of years ago. The fourth element is dosage and method. Ancient practitioners did not chase potency for its own sake. They sought balance. Small, deliberate amounts allowed gradual entry into altered states where clarity could blossom. Today's culture glorifies high THC strains and intense consumption, often overwhelming the mind. To activate spiritually, less is often more. Use enough to soften the boundaries of ordinary thought, but not so much that you lose focus or physical grounding. Consider methods that are gentle and controlled, vaporizing, low-dose tinctures, or carefully prepared herbal mixtures resembling those of old rituals. Avoid overindulgence, which clouds the experience and diminishes integration. Neuroscience supports this approach. Moderate doses enhance frontal cortex activity and promote introspection, while excessive amounts can trigger cognitive disorganization and anxiety. The fifth element is guided focus. Once the plant begins to alter your state, direct your attention inward. This is not a time for screens, chatter, or distraction. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and observe your mind. Watch thoughts arise and pass like clouds. Feel your breath, your heartbeat, your connection to the earth beneath you. From here, deepen into meditation. You may use mantras, visualizations, or silent contemplation of sacred texts. Ancient adepts used chanting to synchronize brainwaves, music to guide emotion, and silence to access the ineffable. Modern studies show that cannabis combined with mindfulness practices significantly enhances self-awareness and emotional insight. Neural coherence improves, regions involved in self-referential thought quiet, and access to intuitive, holistic thinking expands. With focused meditation, you begin to perceive layers of reality often hidden in ordinary states. Patterns of cause and effect, symbolic connections, perhaps even mystical unity with existence. The sixth element is interaction with insight. Cannabis can bring flashes of understanding, visions, or shifts in perspective that feel revelatory. Treat these with respect. Have a journal ready to capture impressions without judgment or analysis. Ancient scribes recorded their visionary experiences to decode later. Some insights may seem profound but fade on sober reflection. Others may seem trivial yet reveal deeper truths over time. The act of writing anchors the experience into long-term memory, allowing integration into daily life. Neuroscience describes this as consolidating neural patterns from transient to stable networks. Spiritually, it is how ephemeral glimpses become embodied wisdom. The seventh element is closure and grounding. A ritual should have a deliberate end, not just drift into distraction or sleep. When the experience feels complete, thank the plant as you would a teacher. Offer gratitude to whatever higher principles or deities you resonate with. Close with deep breathing, gentle stretching, or a symbolic act like extinguishing the candle. Eat nourishing food to ground yourself physically. Reflect on the intention you set and how the session addressed it. Ancient ceremonies always concluded with integration practices, offerings, communal sharing, or solitary reflection. Modern users often skip this, leaving insights unanchored. Grounding bridges the gap between altered and ordinary consciousness, making transformation sustainable. Finally, the practice extends beyond the session itself. Spiritual activation is not about transient highs. It is about awakening a way of being. Insights gained must translate into action, changes in thought, behavior, relationships, and purpose. This is the true measure of success. Not how intense the experience felt, but how deeply it reshapes your life toward wisdom, compassion, and freedom from suffering. Ancient traditions judged mastery not by visions seen, but by virtues embodied, clarity of mind, harmony with nature, and alignment with divine principles. Modern science mirrors this, showing that long-term benefits of altered states depend on post-session integration. Neural pathways strengthened by insights only endure if reinforced through consistent practice and life changes. This path is demanding. It asks for patience, discipline, and humility. It rejects quick fixes and entertainment-driven indulgence. But it offers something infinitely more valuable: access to the deeper dimensions of your own consciousness, guidance from an ancient lineage of wisdom, and a direct connection to the universal intelligence that mystics personified as Thoth. The ibis-headed scribe was said to record every soul's journey, weighing truth and deception, wisdom and folly. When you engage cannabis as a sacred tool, you step into that same mythic narrative. You become a seeker, weighed not by law or stigma, but by the sincerity of your awakening. This practice also has a collective dimension. Imagine communities reclaiming cannabis rituals as part of spiritual education. Temples or retreat centers where science and ceremony merge. Biofeedback devices showing brainwave shifts during sacred sessions. Teachers guiding meditations rooted in Hermetic and yogic traditions. Integration circles where insights are shared and lived. Such spaces could transform not only individuals but society, reducing suffering born of disconnection and ignorance. They would honor the plant not as a commodity but as a sacred ally, restoring its dignity and our own. Thoth's wisdom would no longer be a relic in dusty manuscripts, but a living force reshaping culture toward consciousness and harmony. In truth, nothing stops us from beginning this now. Each of us can become a modern initiate, a practitioner of spiritual activation. The steps are simple. Set intention, prepare space and body, use moderate doses mindfully, meditate deeply, record insights, ground and integrate. With consistency, these practices reshape the relationship to cannabis entirely. It ceases to be a crutch or distraction and becomes a mirror of truth, a catalyst for awakening. Neuroscience confirms the mind's plasticity. Spiritual traditions affirm the soul's capacity for illumination. Combined, they reveal a destiny far beyond the trivial uses we have settled for. This is why you are using weed wrong. Not because enjoyment is evil or relaxation forbidden, but because stopping there is like reading the title of a sacred book and never opening its pages. Cannabis has been entrusted to humanity as a bridge to higher states of being, a key to unlocking wisdom that can heal personal and collective suffering. For millennia, adepts guarded and transmitted this knowledge, encoding it in myths of gods like Thoth, in rituals spanning continents and epochs. Suppression, distortion, and commercialization buried it but did not destroy it. The potential remains, waiting for those willing to remember. To walk this path is to honor that remembrance. It is to approach the plant with reverence, to align with intention, to practice with discipline, and to integrate with courage. It is to unite ancient spirituality and modern science in a living ritual of consciousness. It is to let go of escapism and embrace awakening. When you do this, you are no longer getting high or getting hijacked. You are getting activated. You step through the ancient temple doors not as a lost wanderer, but as a rightful heir to wisdom that transcends time and culture. You reclaim what was always yours: direct experience of truth, connection with divine intelligence, liberation from suffering. In this final chapter, we stand at the threshold together. The map is no longer hidden. The science confirms the path. The myths and temples point the way. All that remains is for you to choose. Will you continue numbing out in loops of distraction, mistaking fog for clarity? Or will you walk the sacred path guided by intention and reverence, activating the dormant capacities of your mind and spirit? Thoth's lost activation is not truly lost. It lives within you, within each mindful breath of sacred smoke, awaiting only your conscious step into the eternal temple of awakening.